Do you think in that case we can just go ahead with the round?
Yeah, sounds good. What's the? Wait, I want to pull up my actual wording for the motion, but internet is garbage. Would you just this as regrets?
Yeah, the existence of AP and honors classes. Yeah.
Okay, well, I guess yeah. So since we're skipping the TSE seminar, we're just going to get straight into the debate itself. I guess unless, since it's small, I guess I could just chair, but we'll probably just have a low-key floor discussion after. My name's Jacob. I go by he or they. I'm going to chair. If I could just have teams introduce themselves, starting with opening government.
Me speaking first, pronouns she or they.
Stanley speaking second, no preference for pronouns.
Maya speaking first, they, them pronouns.
Allie speaking second, she.
Sijneed for closing gov, she, they pronouns, first speaker.
Hi, Ben Whip, here, they.
CO, free speaking first, he or they pronouns.
Swan, speaking second, she, they.
All right, thanks everyone. Just a reminder, we're doing 5-minute speaking times, so make sure you're like paying attention for that. Oh, I'm just getting a message. Sorry, I had to respond to someone about relevant questions. All right, if there are no other questions, then without further ado, I hereby call upon the Prime Minister to open up the speech with a speech of no more than open up this debate with a speech of no more than 5 minutes. You're here.
Okay, for POIs, like, I guess you can say point because I won't be looking at the screen, but don't badger me or I'll be sad. Okay. Five things in this speech, real quick. First, a model, then framing on why we think you are unlikely to get all the benefits of this policy, then on the comparative we think is likely, then on resources, why that is better in our world, and lastly on mental health. So let's start with the model. So I think that this is pretty intuitive. Like, these are classes that are more rigorous. They separate high achieving kids either on this of like kids or testing, like aptitude or IQ testing. This includes things like gifted classes, and this is in high school. I think that's pretty clear. Okay, why is this ineffective? We think that either if this is like an opt-in class, people are bad at adjudicating their own potential, so they often overestimate, like because they succeeded in elementary school, they're going to succeed in high school and will opt into these classes. But I think more often they're just like pressured by their parents who want them to succeed and always believe that their kid is like this perfect gem of an intellectual that may not necessarily be true. So they end up in over their heads. But I think, or in the case in which you have testing, that's like super flawed. Ali knows all these reasons and more than I do, but like psychology is a new and developing field. So at best, it takes them like ages to work out a better system. Many people are left behind. You get all of our harms in the process and none of the benefits. That probably looks like decades. But I think like there's a few reasons for this. Like it's hard to just in general adjudicate the presentation of these factors in youth because this is like a constantly changing thing and kids are going through puberty and their brains are still malleable. So it's very hard to determine like, you know, whether they, for example, are good with spatial intelligence because that part of their brain is still developing. But I think there's also other factors that influence your performance, like confirmation bias of the psychologist who tend to presume that like white guys are generally smarter. If you have like a black student who has like ADHD, they're probably going to attribute that more to their intelligence as opposed to other factors. And just like how much pressure you're being placed in while you're performing and things like that, along with arbitrary cutoffs, means that in general, even though this system might have some benefit, we think that is like pretty minimal in terms of their ability to adjudicate really smart kids. What is the comparative? Regular classes with options for like reading ahead, other enrichment activities like math contests, but nothing for marks. I think that you're also more likely to, in our best case, see special ed classes for students who struggle or like are lower achieving. Why? Because schools generally care about preventing people from failing or maintaining a good average on standardized tests and things like that. And I think they develop more intelligent kids as like the path of least resistance to doing this. So I think that the next most effective option to like bringing up the overall average is targeting the lowest common denominator. That's just something that is like not the easiest way out of it right now. I think if you pressure them to do that, they would. On resources. For the reasons I just mentioned, I think that you're more likely to either give like special ed classes more funding or provide at least just more funding to the average stream. This is good because I think that this looks like having like better teachers with higher levels of education. In the status quo, teachers with like special ed certification often go teach gifted classes instead of open special ed classes because of like the common gifted LD profile. So schools will intentionally hire those people who are limited in number, right? So I think that you lose resources for special ed classes, like people who are equipped to deal with those things. But I think also you get like worse textbooks, worse smart boards, or like lack of smart board or lack of like computers, because when there's limited strain on, or when there's strain on resources, especially in like parts of the US that have like, don't have enough property tax money to fund these schools, that money would get shunted to like the highest performing classes, and you're unable to allow the average kid to access those things. And I think also like just having intelligent kids in the class for like other students to learn from is a resource that you lack in their world. The impact of this is like more students are able to not fail classes as much, to like make it to maybe a state school or a trade school or like what we call a college in Canada. Or just get like a basic scholarship for like 70% average, 75% average, or moving someone from like 70 to 80% average. These marginal changes are really important because they're often the difference between like getting into a school or not getting into a school. And that's where like the majority of kids fall. I also think that you just get less kids dropping out, more kids who might now see themselves in potentially university as opposed to either suffering in a gifted class and like failing and thinking they could never achieve that, or just like not getting any resources or attention or good teaching in an average class. What is the weighing of this? In our worst case, I think that at least this impacts like more people who are average versus the minority who are excellent. But in our best case, I think that it's better to impact the people who are most vulnerable, i.e. the people who can't achieve other things, or not can't achieve, but for whom it is harder to get basic benefits in their world. I also want to point out that degree inflation means that it's really, really important for people to be able to at least make it into post-secondary education. It looks like making 20 or 30K more per year if you have like some kind of college degree, supporting a family versus trying to make it like paycheck to paycheck. That is the impact of our argument, but also on mental health, because I do think this is like a big tipping point for people's mental health. Parents put a huge amount of pressure on kids, create an environment where they can't speak up against them. So kids stick out in classes that they're not succeeding in, often lie to their parents about grades until it's too late. I think that even regular classes still cause mental health issues, but the margin of difference is major, because the averagely smart person can like maintain maybe an 80 or 85% in a regular class, might get a 70% in the gifted class, feel incompetent, compare themselves against the best successful kids, and often in general just have to take more time to spend on assignments, less time to socialize. This should be weighed heavily because mental health is a prerequisite to being able to develop healthy habits and succeeding in the future for the average person. We're proud to propose.
Excellent. I thank the Prime Minister, and I call upon the Leader of Opposition, reminding everyone to try to take and give some POIs.
We didn't ask any POI.
So, yeah, I will take one POI in this speech. I'm not going to take several just because Michaela didn't take any. That's unfair.
Maybe offer me a POI if you want me to take one. I don't know.
I'm just out. Okay. I'll take off my hood. Okay. Okay, starting in 3, 2, 1. All right, let's begin. Okay, panel. Several things for you in this speech. So first, I'm going to give you some framing on this round and actually tell you who matters in this debate, unlike what we get from OG. Then I'm going to give you 2 pieces of constructive, one with 2 subpoints. So just the first one, like the kids who take these classes, talking about the kids who take AP and honors classes and the kids who don't take those courses. Lots of engagement with OG is going to be integrated into that constructive. And then I'm going to talk to you about like school funding. Also integrated reputation to OG. Okay, so I think that this round is like really about ensuring that kids in classes get like adequate attention and preparation for like their catered towards their academic skill level. I think if Allie and I can prove to you that kids are better taken care of by their teachers, and those teachers are better skilled and better equipped to instruct their students because they're divided based upon perceived academic skill level, then I think that we should win. So on the kids who take these classes, so first on the kids who do take AP and like honors/advanced courses, why I think it's better for them to be in like specialized classes. Several reasons. So I think there's like 2 key demographics that we're going to talk about in today's debate on like who takes these courses. So there's like the rich and the privileged kids who are there because like their parents got them extra tutoring, so they're like really on top of the material, right? Those kids on either side of the house are going to be fine, you know? So like they're not really the priority, right? I think the real demographics to talk about is the kids who maybe like aren't super rich, aren't super privileged, but are genuinely like quite smart. I think this is really good for them for several reasons. I think one, it can be an opportunity, assuming they're doing well in the class, to like get like college, college credit to like help out their transcript for to get into college. It can also be a way to like help out with scholarships, college admissions, all of that stuff. But I think more than that, it's an opportunity to take a class that has like a lot of extra resources and attention for them, right? I think it's important to note that a lot of these curriculums are standardized across like a very broad region, right? So you have lots of like online resources that can help kids who would otherwise be in a class that might be like really different and unique just to their school, where they can get like extra help for free, right? I think a good example of this is like Crash Course has like online series dedicated to like almost all the AP tests and curriculums that poor kids who might be taking an AP class could easily access to help them study for a class that could then get them college credit. I think that's a really unique benefit. I think more than that, you also get more teacher attention. Teachers are more likely to take like their AP classes, like assuming like it's a class that they're trained for, like more seriously. I also think when you have students all at the same skill level, you can standardize, you can like cater your teaching specifically for them, right? And like cater to the way that they're learning. I think this is where like the comparative comes in really clearly and is really important, right? Because on the other side of the house, you have teachers in classes with really mixed skill levels, and that leads to one of two scenarios. Either teachers slow down the class to meet the needs of the students who are having trouble keeping up. I think this is unlikely because I think parents who are really invested, like the kind of parents Michaela talks about and like pushing their kids for success all the time, are 100% going to complain to the school if they think their kid's class is moving too slowly. This is also in reputation to what we get out of OG. But I think more than that, the talented kids will just sit there bored doing no work. They'll never be academically challenged. They won't be improving their minds for when they get to further and higher learning, which means when they do get to college, they'll be behind in comparison to their other peers who are in more competitive high schools. But I think secondarily, also another reason as to why it's good to have these AP classes is it's good for kids, this is also a reputation to OG, who like are intending on like going into further schooling, having some taste of what it's like to have academic competition. Not now, I'll take you 4 minutes. To have some academic competition so they can build up like a thicker skin for what it's like to have people be smarter than them. I think beyond that though, the other thing that happens is teachers have to speed up their curriculum beyond the pace of what children who are less academically inclined can keep up with. And then those kids get left behind and don't get extra help because the teachers don't have the time and resources in class to dedicate energy to them because they have to keep up with the smarter kids. Yes, Michaela, I'll take you now.
So it's unclear to me why the other types of advanced learning that I mentioned, like just having like a math contest that you can opt into, or being able to read ahead and teachers encouraging you to go at your own pace, are not things that can exist in your world, with the difference being that they don't get graded for it.
Okay, so I think if you're a poor kid whose family is like, hey, listen, kid, it's okay if you need to study, but your time other than that has to be sent to like stuff that can help make money to support your family. I don't know how children like that are going to justify to their parents being like, hey, I know you said if it's for academics, it's fine. So I can do this like math contest for fun, even though I get no credit and no recognition, right? I don't think that solves. I think beyond that though, that still doesn't solve the actual problem I'm talking about of kids being physically in the classroom together, where half the students are going much faster than the other half, and those half are getting left behind. Giving kids extra math problems in class is just even more draining to the teacher. I feel like you're just not understanding how classrooms actually work. I think then, in terms of the kids who don't take AP, and this is also refutation to what we get from OG and a lot of their stuff on how like on special ed classes, I think when you have like the AP classes, it also indicates that there's like a different skill level that has to be met for the kids in the other courses that needs to be catered to with its own specific resources and teachers of specific skill levels. I think that those needs tend to not be met or noticed when you have them all in the same class, because those students are the ones least likely to ask for help and get extra attention. Proud to oppose.
I thank that speaker, and I call upon the Deputy Prime Minister to continue the government case. You're here.
Okay. So before I begin my speech, I would just like to clarify Sorry, can I restart?
Yeah, sure, if you need to.
Yeah, sorry. So I'd like to begin my speech by framing what this motion actually impact, right? I will point out that there are two groups of electors likely be impacted by this motion. Firstly, it's the privileged who are able to take those AP classes, and they say that those people don't matter. We largely agree. And then secondly, they pointed about this motion is especially important for those who are underprivileged who somehow overperform and somehow end up as placed in class. But all the material benefit they provide that to explain why it's likely to be good for those people is uncompared to the extent that they already acknowledge that those people are unlikely to be minority people who end up in those AP classes, right? That's because structural reason that make it identify, such as people who usually live in school district that just like poor kids are unlikely to end up in those AP classes given that's not offered in those schools. Secondly, they're probably also like cultural structure to the extent that you cannot offer AP that you unlikely do on placement extent and stuff like that. So given that, we're willing to acknowledge that all those benefits they explain why it is likely to be good for some portion of underprivileged people in AP classes is probably likely to be true. But I'll say there's gonna be a very, very small portion of people, and I need to explain why the weighing is just right to the extent that may provide you reason about why this is probably good for people with learning disability or people who are in normal classes who currently do not get the resources they deserve. But also a few additional reasons why those people are unlikely to be a minority within a minority, right? Given that some of those people are still likely to access the alternative learning program that may provide you. They say that those people are unlikely to access those programs. We say that they're probably lower barrier than AP class in the vast majority of instances. That to say that if you want to justify, it's probably cheaper for you to perform in a math competition than for you to actually buy a textbook that costs you $100 or to hire a tutor that probably costs more dollar, right? I think it's like we simply just win on a weighing front. So then going to the weighing. So why is it justified to give resources to the kids who are currently lower performing, right? So as I already explained to you, the marginal return is simply higher to the extent that when you invest in AP classes, you're disproportionately affecting kids who are already privileged. And then the most of the competition of those kind of people who are already like, that's that you get lower marginal return given those kids are probably likely to end up well, right? But I think secondly, reason why it's probably more important that you keep 10 kids in high school, kids who are currently underperforming and like actually provide you additional care, like things such as like better attention and higher, like smaller class sizes, things that make already explain to you than to send one underprivileged kid into Ivy school, right? Why is that the case? Because firstly, we said, and the reason for that is both moral and material, right? Firstly, we said moral concerns because like, given that a lot of those kids who are in those underprivileged background or people who have learning disability are already kids that are already being failed by the state. So that's say that you're probably some sort of moral reason for you as a state to prioritize those kids over kids who are already doing well in the AP exam. But also secondly, you also provide more concurrent material benefits, right? We say that it's probably much more like most of the things they can access in an Ivy League school, you can already probably access in like a lower state school, or they get in like a maybe 70% scholarship that Mick mentioned, right? But secondly, we also see that like kids dropping out of one kid dropping out of high school probably substantially worse than one kid not going to Ivy League school and just going to like UCLA, for example, right? I think we simply win on the weighing front. But then moving on, why is it generally a bad thing? This is like make an analysis about why there's likely to be kids, given that the psychological stress or the parental expectation given to them is likely bad. It's completely unintended within Maya's speech, right? Firstly, like Mick explained to you why kids, because their brains are still developing, other like psychological reasons about they're unlikely to be comfortable within those classes. Never refuted. Secondly, oh my God, so little time. I'm probably not gonna take a PY. Secondly, other parental pressure that are imposed upon those people that are other additional reasons why those kids are unlikely to do well, right? But also the other additional reason that why those kids are unlikely bad. Firstly, you have to recognize that a lot of times those pressure are imposed on parental level. That's just like when you're in the grade 10, it's very unlikely that this decision is being made by you as opposed to your parents. I think a lot of kids end up in those schools and they have no real mechanism to opt out, given that it's not like college, you can just drop your classes. There are also other parental pressures of why you won't be opt out even if you know that you're not ready for those classes. But secondly, we also see that it's slightly bad for kids who start in an uneven playing field, right? Maya already identified about kids who are underprivileged in AP classes are the group of actors we probably want to care about more. Those people, first of all, they're unlikely to be a higher tutor. They're unlikely to have family support that actually like explain what those classes are like. Thirdly, you're unlikely to peer support to the extent that you ending up being the only poor kids in the AP exam, you're unlikely to support from your peer, and then who are from maybe like the same ethnic composition from the same community. Thirdly, there probably some kind of class distinction that make it then unlikely to provide you A. All those reasons are why you're probably better off to stay in the normal classes and actually spend time with peer from a similar background and then do other things that I explained are lower barrier that probably gonna get you into better school, whatever. For that reason, I'm proud to propose.
I thank the Deputy Prime Minister, and I call upon the Deputy Leader of Opposition to close off the top half of this debate. Here.
Okay, guys, I will try to take a POI. Just unmute yourself and say POI. I think that's gonna help me not avoid you. Okay. Let's do this. Okay, the group of people that OG is systematically ignoring are people who are very smart but have a lack of resources in their home environment, or would have a lack of resources in their classrooms at like their regular school with no extra classes, right? So what we're going to tell you is how the lives of those people get better, both in high school and moving forward, and how funding within a school gets better overall when you have AP classes, which is how you address the issues that OG talks about in terms of giving funding to like special ed classes. I will say one thing in response to that before I get into like what's generally going to be rebuilding and refutation all mixed together. I think it's a lot easier to justify funding for special ed classes when, as a norm, you're already delineating people based on their learning ability. When you say we have groups of kids who are in different areas, they have different learning abilities. We have people who are in AP classes who learn super fast and just are able, at this point in life, like they're able to grasp that material faster. You have people who are learning at what is like an average pace, and you have people who need a bit more time and a bit extra care. I think if you're already doing that delineation, it's a lot easier to say we need funding for all these groups, as opposed to saying everybody's in the same class, everybody's happy, the teacher is playing to the lowest common denominator, we don't need anything more. I think that's actually when you run into issues with funding. Okay, so let's talk about funding more than that as well. So what my partner was getting to but didn't quite like finish talking about was how do we think schools get money, and what does that have to do with AP classes, right? So I think as a school, if you're able to offer an AP class and you have people who go to that class and are doing well, you're able to say to like your school board, like, look, we have these high achieving kids who need these resources in order to continue to be high achieving. And it looks good for your school if you have kids who are taking AP classes and getting 5s on the exams and then getting college credit for that. The thing is that there's a lot of resource spillover. So resources you need for like AP classes, like all the the textbooks and like, you know, fancy technology or whatever, like goes into classrooms that are then used by other classes. So just as a general thing, if you have kids who are doing AP classes and doing well in those AP classes at your school, the school overall would probably get more funding, which helps all the kids. Okay. The other thing they talk about is how instead of AP classes, you could have extra things within your class that kids can do but aren't being graded. The issue with this is what Mai already talked about, which is you no longer have the extra incentive of an AP class, which is that it can get you college credit. It can look really good on your transcript. It can do a lot of extra things for you, which justify putting in that extra work, whether it means like otherwise you wouldn't be studying, you'd be doing something else, or otherwise your parents would be making you like work and help support your family. Instead, you can say, no, this AP credit is going to get me like college credit, which means like I'm going to have a leg up if I actually go to college. And this applies regardless of the college you're going to. If OG thinks you get just as good an education at a state school as you do as at an Ivy League, fine. We don't actually care about that. What we care about is when you get to college, if you're actually able to go. Now it costs less because you don't have to take that extra class because you took the AP credit. Things like that actually matter to the types of kids we're talking about who are super smart and could actually do things, but they have systemic barriers in their way that we're trying to overcome. And we think as a school, it is your responsibility to help kids like that overcome those systemic barriers that they cannot like overcome themselves. We're giving them an opportunity, we're giving them resources to actually achieve something greater than they otherwise would. And we think doing a simple like extra hard math problem that doesn't actually give you anything written on paper isn't enough of a removal of a barrier, that it's not it's not at all equivalent to having an actual course that you can put on a transcript that you can give to a college and say, look at this thing I did, look at this thing that I'm really good at. That's something that actually enables you to like get further in life. Sure, POI.
So if we buy your characterization that parents really pressure money and resources to come to develop their like really smart child, then why is it likely that the funding gains that you get actually benefit like the average student or the worst off student, especially when those are often like special textbooks for a special AP course as opposed to something that you could use for these other students?
Okay, so one, like, yeah, an A-push textbook, AP US History textbook, is an AP US History textbook. It's also just a history textbook. So I don't think this is the same, that like all the resources you get just for AP classes actually have that spillover. I think the thing is you have rich people with capital pushing for your school to get more funding, or you're giving funding to the school so that they can actually have AP classes. But there are spillover effects in terms of like the technology you need or the level of teachers you need. Often you have teachers who teach the AP classes, but also teach other classes, but they're more skilled teachers because they got that extra certification, things like that. So the thing you need to focus on in the speech, what you need to get from OO, is the kids we're helping. We are helping kids who would be taking AP classes on either side because we're challenging them and we're giving them like some ability, some knowledge of what college is going to be like. We allow them to succeed for many reasons. But we also help kids who otherwise would be like struggling or left behind in regular classes because the teachers now can pay more attention to them because the super smart kids are out of the class learning at a different pace, and you can focus more attention on the kids who need more time. We help everybody. Yay, vote O.
I thank that speaker, and I call upon the member of government to extend the government case. Hear, hear.
Awesome, thank you. If I sound a bit woozy, please excuse. I have got a total of 1.5 hours of sleep. Okay, so let's begin. Panel, we generally agree upon the framework that TOEFL brings to us. This idea that AP and honors classes have like inherent, like the way they work in terms of like segregated classrooms, which like separate students on their ability, and it is largely an opt-in system. We think that there's like further analysis to be done in terms of how this opt-in system works and how it like poses differential barriers to access for high achieving students themselves, which seem to be like the preferred actor for OO in this round. So I'm going to like move on into 2 points for extension with some integrated rebuttal towards OO. The first point is on differential access. So we understand that AP and honor classes take money. Not only do they like require money for like schools to funnel resources into, but also from students who have to enroll enroll at like different fees to these classes. The standardized test itself might have its own costs. There might be like some waivers involved. However, like they're largely like inaccessible for the most amount of people, i.e. this means that all high achieving students cannot access this kind of class in the first place, but also that enrolling in AP and honors requires like two things, like time and money. I think we get like substantial evidence out of like the top half about this, but I think like it's key to note that understandably, the fact that not all achievers might have either of both or like either or both in abundance. Like kids might be doing like music, or like an after school job, depending on like their financial situation. I think the issue to like recognize here is that only those who have the money for these classes and time to spare can actually enroll into these classes in the first place, right? Like a disadvantaged students who cannot afford to opt in into the system. It means that we already do not have like this large majority of people who might be high achieving, but have like less resources to spend into it, right? This is like generally what we also get out of the top half. Now the issue with this is, and what we recognize is that like at some point we do care about how a high achieving students like can supplement their interests, but also how they can pad their resumes and like ensure a better life for themselves by going to college, because we generally understand that like AP tests have had some kind of like importance in terms of like your college applications. We think the counterfactual to this kind of world is developing programs that schools have the freedom to design, mostly because like the AP system also imposes a very rigid syllabi on schools. This means that the curriculum is decided by like I don't know, like a college or testing board. Schools have less freedom to like design programs which might be like of particular interest for the students. in their like region or like catering to specific students.
Point.
I think like I'll take it like later, but I think like opening government makes like a fatal flaw in terms of like talking about like their counterfactual as extra opportunities, which are ungraded. I just think like at the point at which like schools have like the freedom to design these courses, like high-level courses, they can still like kind of have those kind of things, but not have associated extra costs with it. They can create like graded programs, like in the same way, but like look experientially challenging as well. So this can mean like tying up with a local community college and have like students like be research assistants for like professors there. You can like have students like do volunteer projects or design like their own sustainable development projects as part of like credit to take. Like maybe this might not give you college credit for like for the future, but we still think that in like it still serves the motivations of students who are looking to challenge themselves academically, but also provides like a less barrier-free way for students to like develop their interests and like kind of what's it called? Yeah, I will take Reese's POI at this point.
Recognize, though, that even in your world, there are still barriers for time and socioeconomic class and funding of schools that manifest nearly identical and symmetrical like issues. How on earth is this comparative?
So I think like the issue we bring to you is that we design like a system which is not opt-in, right? You create a system which is automatic of rewarding high achieving students, whether it's with like providing them with like on and off opportunities, like which could be volunteer, but all like graded in a sense, or this could be like, hey, like develop your own projects kind of thing that you can do on your own time. I think there's a lot more breadth when like schools are able to design their own curriculum. It like creates possibilities for creating like programs that might be mutually beneficial for like students in the community. This like just brings in like better learning opportunities for all students, like high achieving or not. There's less inequality involved and like less competition. I'm so proud to propose.
I thank that speaker, and I call upon the member of opposition to extend the opposition case. Here.
Can everyone hear me okay? Just say points to me out loud. That's all good with me. Okay. I think the primary flaw in this round as a whole is that every team has failed to be meaningfully comparative, especially the government bench. Note that the entire government bench is contingent upon recognizing that there are systemic biases that exist in terms of education. Recognize also that they fail to exist, that these systemic barriers are going to continue to manifest. Our primary extension is about how the mechanisms in which student selection, especially for post-secondary education, becomes actually structurally worse and comparably like worse in terms of reliance on post-academic and co-curricular and extracurricular materials. I think it's on these grounds that we weigh out why there's actually a structural harm on site government. But before that, let me just deal with all of the government material, basically washing out everything that's happened in this round so that I can emerge at least some semblance of a case from the rubble that remains. Okay, so the first main claim is going to talk about mental health and pressure from parents, from OG. Recognize that this is totally asymmetric. Parents apply pressure to their students but want them to succeed. If AP classes no longer exist, parents are still going to apply extra pressure to their kids to succeed. It's just going to be channeled through other avenues, right? The pressure isn't because they're AP classes themselves, but rather because they're the path to university and success. If this path takes other forms, the pressures are going to change. The stress is going to change elsewhere. I don't see how at all this is comparative. The second claim is about structural biases. Note, this is going to differentiate ourselves largely from OO because we're going to bite the harm that systemic bias and structural inequalities do exist in education. There is structural bias in terms of how streaming occurs. There is structural inequalities due to funding, and there is structural inequalities due to access to the classes. The problem is that these structural inequalities are uncomparative. This is the root of my extension. Why is this? One, in terms of dealing with CG and OG, funding inequalities will continue to exist in terms of school financing. Schools largely have differential funding, not based on funneling money to particular classes, but based on where the the schools are located and where school boards they are actually located. Funded primarily by property taxes, it doesn't matter if you merge the two classes into one, because the primary issue isn't that the advanced class is getting more than the than the regular class, but rather that the school board, which is in the wealthier neighborhood, is getting more money than the one that isn't. These structural barriers continue to exist. The increases in funding is rather marginal. I also don't think this is a grounds in debate which can actually be weighed out. What then actually happens? Notice on both sides of their house, there is an impetus for universities to create barriers or to do some degree of streaming between what applicants they actually take. At the point at which academic classes or advanced classes no longer become the point of emphasis for streaming between students, there is two potential paths they take, and I think there becomes an over-reliance on two alternative mechanisms. The first is which is an over-emphasis, on terms of like an over-focus on grades. I think this, in terms of like people's need to succeed at the very top echelons of these classes, creates a parallel weighing in terms of like the strategic imbalances in terms of funding, access, and time that exist on either side of the house. The second, and I think this is where the greater change is actually going to occur, is an over-focus on extra academic or extracurricular materials. That is, there's going to be a higher impetus for students to have a built-out resume outside of the impetus of grades, because now universities need an alternative mechanism to screen students, and there is no longer a capacity to screen students as easily based on class performance, and so they're going to rely on things like your participation in clubs, your participation in co-curriculars, your participations in things outside of the school. Recognize these do take additional time, and these things do take additional money. The wording that's actively the point, and I'm going to take a few at the very end, the point where we differ substantially, though, is while there's substantial time and money imbalances in terms of academic classes, although in honors classes, there is that much higher money intake. It's like academic versus like advanced in Canadian schools or whatever it's called, also is comparable in terms of there's no extra money cost, but there is obviously a time cost and biases. Recognized for extracurriculars, this is multiplied tenfold because the cost barriers are emphasized and the access regionality is also different. That is, it is much more difficult to have clubs and co-curriculars or extracurriculars in like poorer regions where there's substantially less funding, where all schools, even if they have less funding, are still going to be able to offer more advanced placement classes. I think this is a critical element because it further reinforces the structural imbalances, but now reinforces access as a whole. We'll take a POI from whoever.
Okay, so in our best case, like, I think these types of extracurriculars are more accessible because you just have to like stay after school for like an hour to do environment club. You don't need money. And in our worst case, it's a wash because the time that you waste doing like your extra advanced placement materials or classes, or because it's harder, you could just spend on those.
Okay, two things like I already said. One, all schools offer like academic versus applied curriculum. It's not necessarily true that all schools are going to offer after school activities or offer clubs, because this requires teachers to opt into these systems, which they don't always do, especially if they're lower income and live in those neighborhoods. The second thing is that money costs don't always exist. They're likely going to exist asymmetrically or not exist at all in terms of the weighing of this round. So I think that's also a wash. I'm way over time. Thank you.
I thank that speaker, and I call upon the government whip to conclude the government case. You're here.
Regarding POIs, just type POI in the chat and I'll call on you if I feel like talking to you. Okay. I think one of the major issues with this round is everyone is under the assumption that basically all schools actually have AP and honors classes. I think that's just a lie. How do you think that the schools in like bumfuck Tennessee or bumfuck Alberta that, you know, can barely keep the school going, barely have enough school supplies, teachers are buying school supplies, they're using books from the 1970s, you think they're going to be able to run AP classes? I went to a fairly decently sized like urban, like within the city high school, and we could barely like run more than 5 AP classes. So I really think it is a lot to assume that these schools are going to be able to run them in the first place. And I think that's the major issue. What Sajin, I think, is so brilliantly provided is building upon, albeit the flawed, I think, counterfactual that was brought to you by the opening bench, expanded upon it and brought it actually an issue that not only extends the syllabus, but allows schools to actually help integrate this more into the stream of their state curriculum. Because I think the biggest issue with honors and AP classes is often they're a completely separate stream. You spend most of your time focusing on not how to pass your diplomas, not how to pass the SATs, but how to pass your AP tests. So what we're saying is that schools actually have an ability to help integrate this greater into the state curriculum, build them more into the communities, and also have more just opportunities for community access. So overall, what I'm going to do, essentially, I'm going to go through each one. I'm just going to weigh and see how we've already won this round. So let's just start with OO. First of all, OO rests on this idea of like trickle down economics, basically, that if you have a bunch of funding for the top students, somehow it's going to make, all those rich parents give a fuck about poor kids and not smart kids, which I just believe, just like trickle down economics, it's not going to work, because you know what? Rich people don't care about other people. That's just a fact. So I don't think they actually provided a proper mechanism for how, like, oh, all of a sudden, if there's going to be some decent AP success, that funding is actually going to go in students that, are already at a structural disadvantage and are already in those like special ed classes that may not even exist. Once again, also, I think that more school districts, especially ones that are already underperforming, aren't going to go for, AP classes. They're going to go for probably special ed classes, because once again, if you do not have that buildup in elementary and middle school, that can actually build to AP class, you're probably gonna have a lot more kids that, probably need a greater amount of help than just the AP students. Well, I'm not going to take a POI now. So essentially, your schools are probably going to already opt for that funding if they already are in like rural or just underfunded areas. Instead of going for AP, they're going to try to build kids up to the average, not just help the ones that are already exceeding, right? Okay, so that's, I think, why I've taken another case in the amount of time that I have. Okay, so let's just go on and engage with the other half. Also, that's something I think takes over top half. We're actually going to try to engage with our equivalent number. So essentially what they're saying is that there's an overemphasis on grades and there's an overemphasis on extracurricular activities. Both things already exist within the status quo. And we think that these are already just major structural issues in the college process. What they fail to recognize is that AP is a standardized system that, everyone is measured on upon their excellence. Something that we recognize in our counterfactual is that when you take away the standardized system that not everybody can afford and you have a more state integrated, localized system, one that is less expensive and more focused on dealing with the community, it's actually a lot easier for people who might not, be able to afford AP to even be considered by higher universities, because it is that more localized, standardized system working with community rather than just one baseline. If you cannot afford that baseline, how can you even, assume someone can be even considered by these higher colleges? So overall, what did we talk about? What did Sijneet Brilliant brought you? First of all, Sijneet, I think, articulated the best this idea of differential access. Not only what these resources take in time and money, but a reason that actually this, can be supplanted. Of course, kids, there's going to be different levels in these mixed classes, but I think that exists in any classes. Not only by having these kids in the mixed classes where they do have these opportunities that are more a little bit extracurricular or just integrated within that state system, is first of all, you lose a sense of intellectual elitism, which I think the social aspect of this was not brought up in this debate. I think it lowers stress, because once again, you're not just, when you're in an AP class, it's kind of like this pressurized environment. And also I think we're also just assuming a lot in this round that sure, I'll take a point.
Notice that your case rests on these schools that you, as you frame, can't afford textbooks or can't provide for their students, are all of a sudden going to replace AP classes with these like magical extracurricular localized classes. How is this comparative? Where are they getting this money from? And how will students who can't do an AP class because of lack of time do these programs if they still have a lack of time?
Okay, yeah. So if they have a lack of time, first of all, these are something that's going to be more integrated within, within classes. And AP classes, it's not just one class from the block. It's actually a ridiculous more amount of time. There's that testing. If you have that they're still focused on SATs, it's still realistic that even if they're doing stuff outside of the class, it's going to be less time than focusing on this one exam. Second of all, with money, with community partnerships, it first of all brings down costs. Overall, okay, I'm running out of time. Overall, what we see is we actually have a system that designed on the, the lower kind of rungs of the ladder here that focuses most on these structural barriers and overall finds opportunities within local communities, within local systems, and provides a less standardized system than these AP and honor classes, which really just focus on people who can't afford these classes. We provide more localized, we provide less standardized, therefore better. I'm running out of time. Thank you.
I thank that speaker, and I call upon the opposition whip to conclude this debate.
Okay, sorry, I just gotta organize my notes a little. Okay, I'm gonna start in 3, 2, 1, go. Okay, I think we have to recognize that what Reese has brought to you and what CEO has brought to you has been the only thing that's actually been comparative on like historically what would happen if we took away AP and like honors classes, right? I think up and down the gov bench, they try to kind of make assertions that, you know, oh, we're going to get all this lovely funding for special, like we're going to get, you know, like better extracurricular activities, and that's actually like lower access because AP classes are super expensive. Okay, well, I think Reese has been the only one to actually tell you the time costs actual money, right? They're telling you that, oh my gosh, it's going to be so much pressure to have standardized testing and like be able to stress about passing my AP exams. You know what else is going to be stressful? If I'm a low-income student, if I have to balance like my 30-hour-a-week part-time job to feed my family on top of doing like a bunch of extracurriculars, because now universities don't care so much about my grades since there's no streamlined like academic system to prove that I'm serious about school, right? What Reese brings to you is the actual institutional analysis talking about how universities are actually going to start selecting students if the alternative of AP and art classes doesn't exist, right? So I think the question here is like, what metric can we actually use to like select for students, and what universities will be incentivized to choose, right? And I think that like on that point, I think we significantly weigh out in our opening half because we actually talk about what it's like and like what this like and what the shift to extracurriculars will realistically look like in our side of the world, right? And we think that like, you know, unfortunately, like that structural inequality and like the socioeconomic differences are going to exist on both sides of the house anyway, right? Like we don't claim that we can like solve like, you know, like socioeconomic inequality, but at the very least, the, you know, marginalized students who do make it into APs and honors classes have much higher of a chance of like succeeding on our side of the house and being able to access quality post-secondary education because we have a standardized system, which can actually like, which will make it easier for like these inequality speakers. Okay, I'll take POIs
right.
like by like, I don't know, 4th minute. Yeah. Okay, cool. Okay, so I think like I guess I'll just have like some responses to to kind of what we heard from just what we heard from the CG Whip and this idea that like, you know, like there's not going to be enough resources for like schools to like be able to successfully implement AP and we should have more localized programs. I think the issue with this is that the lack of standardization is going to allow universities to discredit whatever localized programs are coming out of areas that are already considered like less advantaged, right? I think that if that's true and they want to bring that to us as a point, I don't think you can actually have that. And I think we very much weigh out on our side of the house. And insofar as we are also the ones to actually tell you what the real purpose of high school is. Like, you know, of course we care about students and like we want them to like advance in like their learning or whatever, but realistically speaking, what is high school actually about? High school is about access to university. And, you know, as OG tells you, university is important for, you know, like success, right? And so insofar that this is true, we need to realistically talk about like how these resources are actually going to be allocated, right? And we think that on our side, if we keep a system that's easier to be standardized and can actually realistically be implemented in multiple different locations, regardless of funding, regardless of like, you know, whether you're in bumfuck Tennessee or like in the middle of Massachusetts, it's much easier to do that over extracurriculars that have to account for example, geographical location. I can't go on a fun field trip if I'm surrounded by a bunch of suburbs that are just boring houses. Where I'm going to go for my ecological field trip? You know, like it's hard to convince the school to care about art or sports. What, like, if, you know, if the people in that area just consider art to be like gay or whatever, and they're like, you know, I can't do that. Like, I got to stick to my like extracurriculars that involve hunting or whatever. So I actually think on our side of the house, we realistically provide a mechanism that actually addresses those inequalities. Okay, I'll take a POI from opening.
The streamline you talk about extremely narrow for marginalized kids on either side to begin with, right? I think the marginal benefit that you provide, you need to weigh that against why we explain to you how we provide benefits for kids who are like barely struggle to stay in high school.
Okay, here's the thing though. I think that the entirety of what you bring to us from OG is largely a wash because kids are gonna, like, if they're already struggling within the mainstream system, what makes you think that they're actually going to be able to like, okay, I think the benefits you bring to us would be great if they were actually likely to happen. But with what I just explained to you about like how, you know, schools are not necessarily going to actually shift to making extracurriculars any more accessible, I don't think you could tell me that you could claim and outweigh those benefits, right? So I think that on our side of the house, what we actually told you here is like the realistic mechanism for how we can ensure that students will actually be selected for the universities that they like so hard, like, you know, work hard to choose. And I think that you know, through the standardized lens and through like AP and honor systems, you actually have a tiered way to like ensure that universities can't use other metrics that are even more like biased, involving like their perception of extracurriculars or standardized test scores. Okay, yeet. Thanks for listening.
All right, awesome, everyone. I guess while I look over notes and come up with a coherent call, Sajid, are you okay with running like the floor vote of the people that are here and taking takes from the audience? I'll not mute, I'll turn down my volume so that I don't get influenced by people's takes.
Sounds good. Okay. We're going to do the floor vote first. So I think the way we can do this, I'm seeing...
I can set up a poll.
Oh yes, Ben can set up a poll so you can vote for... Wait, I just realized we haven't ever done like voting for BP before because there's 4 teams. But I guess we can just do gov and op. And
Or
then
we could like vote for just like the first, I guess, and that's also nicer because like other teams can feel good because everyone takes the second except for one team.
Oh, okay.
like that.
So I think there should be an option. Is there an option for us to do like a paragraph sort of answer? In that case, we can do that. I love the frame of Ali's video with Maya in the background. It's awesome. So far away.
You love my box, just chilling.
I
My wardrobe box.
All chic.
Am I close enough now?
Oh. Mhm.
Yeah. The poll should be up.
Oh, Ben and I can't vote.
You
I
can
can
include
vote
that
for
when you're.
you or ban.
To be honest, I don't
doing it.
understand why we're all voting.
We shouldn't be allowed to
That's
vote.
Yeah, I feel
I
like
mean,
we shouldn't be allowed to vote.
If you factor in like Sajneet and Ben's hypothetical votes, then it will be the same. It just is nice to cast a vote for yourself. It's self-affirming, self-love.
To be
I
fair,
didn't
if
vote
my-
for myself.
I don't know if I want to vote for myself.
I
don't
always
know
vote
about
for
that.
myself. Do you guys not believe in your own cases?
like if I
No, I
voted
just like
for
to give
myself,
other
I
people a
would
chance
never.
to win.
If I had 7 minutes, I might be able to like vote for
Same.
myself, but with
Same.
5, like
Messy. Yikes.
Yeah, I don't
Sorry
think
for
I'd ever
that,
get
Sam.
anything above a third if I voted for myself.
Oh, sorry.
I feel I'm just gonna abstain from voting.
That's fine.
I will
Unfortunately, we don't
abstain.
have the option for the
If
moose.
you'd like, you can ignore my
it
vote.
seems
I
like
know.
it seems like everyone.
I'll like
has
imaginarily vote for the moose. Is that okay?
Anyways, Jacob
I'll
has a
just,
call.
like-
Oh yeah, I did.
Let's let him give the call so he can go back to studying for the MCAT.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. This was the poll has been released. So can you guys?
Oh, okay, yes. Cool.
Wow, look at
Fair.
that.
It do be an opening half.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
So just to give my call real quick and take this with a grain of salt because I came up with it very quickly. So there might be some splits that are a little whack. So my call is as follows. I give the first to opening opposition, the second narrowly to closing opposition, the third to opening government, and the fourth to closing government. I'm going to start at the bottom because I have the most feedback for closing government, to be honest. So I think the problem that I had with closing government is that I think that there were 2 issues, right? One is that a lot of the things that were discussed that you spent a lot of a 5-minute speech was already short on, extending on things that were kind of flagged in top half, right? So it wasn't just that there were things about how there's sort of barrier access fees. So for example, Michaela, I believe, talked about how people that can get in are people that can afford like tutoring and stuff, which means maybe you provide extra cost, like you have to pay for the test itself, but it's not like above it. It's not really a huge marginal impact of this new mechanism to spread out. And the other thing is that I think these ideas about like how you could then reshape your curriculum in new ways is both one, even if it's new compared to like OG's analysis about like how we can do extracurricular things that teach you more and more stuff. I'm also unsure about if we're adding all these extra things, isn't that just like a form of an honors class that sort of is against the underlying principle of government bench? So at the end of the day, I'm like, a little confused between things that are derivative and things that are underdeveloped. And maybe I'm just like not understanding certain nuances of your case super well, but I was unpersuaded. My advice is this. If you, especially when you have 5 minutes, it is super important to make sure that all 5 minutes are spent, or as much of the 5 minutes as possible are spent on clearly new things that are like high impact. And if you feel that you had things burned, go for things that are like, I don't know, that could be like a Hail Mary. So in this particular debate, one thing that opening government like sort of touched on but didn't do anything with was like, if it's true that these AP classes are like rich elite kids that are being like segregated into their own separate streamed classes and creating social groups accordingly, what does that do for the social like segregation of a school, right? When you have like two different like sets of classes with all of the rich like majority kids in one class and like poor marginalized kids in another, I feel like you can, you know, divide networks and have like lots of harms associated with just like regular segregation, even though it's happening within one school. And so I think going into what the social ramifications of something like that are like clear extension material that is definitely not something that was mentioned in Top Half, that perhaps you could imagine places you could go with that material about how it affects the you know, inequality within a school, both in terms of access to networks, but also, which is with respect to people that are currently not in those classes, but also in like how, you know, like understanding, tolerant, etc. People that are currently in like honors and AP classes are, given that they are often in like little bubbles of like other rich kids that generally make them into worse people. So yeah, so that's my take for closing government. Hopefully that's to some extent helpful. In terms of the CG-OG split, I think the thing with OG is that they have a lot of good material, but then it's responded to and they don't rebuild it substantially. And this sort of makes it really difficult to put them that high in the round because all of their best points are kind of refuted to some extent, right? So the problems of this, like I believe that there are a lot of problems in assigning people to classes, that these classes are probably going to have, you know, some degree of like inequality in that, you know, you have like super, you know, like elite kids in like one class, and that's not necessarily based on intelligence, but might be based on like wealth or other like sort of arbitrary factors. The problem is that the stuff that we get out of opening opposition reasonably takes down a lot of this, right? The idea that even if the segregation does happen, it could be acceptable if it prevents teachers from sort of like, you know, teaching towards people that excel due to like, you know, money that their parents spend on their tutoring or extracurriculars that enable them to sort of, you know, require more attention. And so if the underlying effect is that you enable, you know, classes made up of people that are at similar academic levels, and therefore teachers are better able to teach to a median that is more representative of the class as a whole, and everyone's education gets better, then the impacts of this are not as clear. And so generally, I don't think this is sufficiently like rebuilt at any point where I'm convinced that the resource issue is ever substantially greater than the like harm in terms of like, you know, either speeding up or slowing down the class that we hear from Maya. So essentially, like the problem is that the point about resources was interesting, but the impact is that quality of education gets worse. And I don't really believe the quality of education gets worse on-site opposition because of all of the stuff that Maya says. So it sort of just takes down OG's case. Sorry if that's vague, but I still think there's like inklings of things that are true, right? Like maybe there's like a little bit more resources, but it's like sort of unclear about, you know, how this happens. I'm not sure what resources are required for like AP US history, maybe a slightly more qualified teacher, but you know, who knows, lots of teachers are qualified. Sorry, I'm rambling. In terms of the OO-CO split, I think the problem that I have with CO, and sorry, I'm not really explaining clashes super well. My problem with CO is that the cost things for extra, one, I think that engaging with the comparatives is good, and it's probably true, right? It probably takes down a lot of the mental health things. You probably put that stress elsewhere. The pressure from parents stuff, I think, is also very good responses to OG that take down a lot of their like mental health points. The problem is just like, at some of this point feels like it's a little bit mitigatory, like we're just shifting the problem but not making it that much worse. And so the part of the case that I really need to believe is that these extracurriculars provide a substantially greater barrier than AP classes do. And at this point, I think was like a little underdeveloped. And although it wasn't refuted very well in the round, I just like, and maybe this is shitty judging, but I just don't believe it. Like, I think Michaela's POI is actually pretty reasonable, and I'm going to credit it as refutation. It's just like, if I stay after school to go to my like ecology club for an hour, is that really that much of a commitment compared to like the tutoring I need to like do well in an AP test? And then I get slapped that I went to ecology club and was my ecology club president on my resume, and that looks good. So if you're saying these things become more important, and there's any sort of doubt that perhaps those things are actually more significant, or those things you're saying are becoming more significant or actually more accessible than the alternative, then you're sort of undercutting your whole material and conceding the debate to government. So because the refutation to that wasn't super thorough, I was like, maybe like I don't actually think this happens in the round, but I'm still like really dubious about the underlying claims being made. So I really struggled to place you like over your top half. And the OGCO split is very close for that reason. Maybe I should have flipped it, but I didn't think about it for that long. I'm just sort of shooting takes at you, hoping that you'll learn from some of them. Apologies. And things I liked about OO. OO is able to give me, I think, mechanisms which are reasonable why education gets worse for most people. Specifically, the ideas about why generally segregating classes based on academic level is good for making sure that teaching could be focused towards people's general interests and abilities. I think the stuff about resources was interesting. I think they could have picked better examples. For example, maybe it's not textbook, but it's just like chemistry supplies that could be used equally well in any chemistry class, but you might particularly require for the AP chemistry test, which is lab requirements, or computers you need for AP computer science be used for like a computer lab or whatever. And I think that some of the framing about convincing rich people to like buy into it were probably valid, although they're not necessarily the most salient cause of inequality. But I think it's true that even rich neighborhoods might struggle to like raise the percentage of property taxes, even if their tax base could be quite large. And so having some mechanism by which you can convince rich people to tolerate their taxes being raised in a way that has spillover benefits is probably a reasonable mechanism for getting better resources. So I think OO is probably able to prove better resources that do, to some extent, trickle down and like grow the pie, as it were. I think these are sort of more believable impacts compared to their closing half. And like I said, I think all of their reputation takes down OG. Apologies for the fact that was messy as shit, but hopefully like there's some learning that everyone could get out of this.